go. Yeah, that's better. You can get it. Marvelous.
Hello everyone, it's Kevin, and today we're talking about a game that probably never should have existed on a Nintendo console. When people think about Nintendo 64 games, they usually think about games like Mario, Zelda, Smash Bros, or Banjo-Kazooie. You know, bright colors, family-friendly adventure, classic Nintendo stuff. But then there's Conker's Bad Fur Day, a game where the main character wakes up hungover. He stumbles his way through a medieval village and eventually ends up fighting a giant singing pile of poop. Sexual innuendos, violence, this game just has everything. And somehow, this was a first-party Nintendo release. Now I actually have a bit of history with this one. I played the original version on Nintendo 64, and later in life I played the Xbox remake, Conker Live and Reloaded. Both versions are memorable for slightly different reasons, but now it's the 25th anniversary of Conker's Bad Fur Day, so it felt like the perfect time to revisit it. So today, we're going back to one of the weirdest games ever released on the N64, to see how Conker's Bad Fur Day holds up today. It's time to power on and revisit a classic. Released in 2001 on the Nintendo 64, Conker's Bad Fur Day was developed by Rare. And at the time, Rare was absolutely on fire. These were the same developers behind games like Banjo-Kazooie, GoldenEye, Perfect Dark, and the Donkey Kong series from the SNES to N64. But unlike any of those games, Conker's development story is actually pretty strange. Originally, the game was planned as a much more traditional platformer called 12 Tales, Conker 64. It looked cute, colorful, and pretty standard for the time, but Rare eventually realized that the N64 had plenty of mascot platformers. So instead of competing with Mario and their own mascots, they decided to go in a completely different direction. The result was Conker's Bad Fur Day, a platformer packed with crude humor, movie parodies, and moments that feel completely out of place on a Nintendo console. The tone reminded me of South Park, and in fact, I think the only games that come close to this in tone is South Park: The Stick of Truth and its sequels. This was quite the product at the time. Even today, it still stands as one of the most unusual games in the entire N64 library. I played this game with my brother, and this was one of those games that we had to finish once we started it, because it kept getting more unhinged, and it was just amazing. At its core, Conker's Bad Fur Day is still a 3D platformer. You're exploring different areas, jumping across platforms, solving puzzles, and occasionally dealing with enemies along the way. But one of the biggest mechanics in this game comes from something called the context-sensitive pads. These pads give Conker special abilities depending on the situation. Sometimes it lets him use a slingshot, other times it triggers puzzle mechanics or specific actions needed to progress. It's actually a pretty simple but clever system. Instead of giving Conker a massive list of moves like Banjo-Kazooie, this game introduces abilities only when they're needed, which keeps things simple while still allowing the gameplay to evolve throughout the adventure. Combat itself is very straightforward. You got basic attacks, jumping attacks, and a few situational abilities depending on the level. But the real focus of the game isn't the combat, of course. It's the spectacle, the situations the game puts you in, because every area introduces something different. Sometimes you're solving puzzles, sometimes you're platforming, and sometimes the game just throws you into something completely ridiculous. And when I say ridiculous, I mean it. That unpredictability is a big part of what makes Conker memorable.
Oh no. It's gonna be one of those days.
The story starts off pretty simple. Conker wakes up after a night of drinking with his friends and realizes he's completely lost. His only goal is to get back home to his girlfriend. But of course, things don't go smoothly. Along the way, Conker runs into cavemen, zombies, bizarre creatures, sexy sunflowers, and some of the strangest characters you'll ever see in an N64 game. And then there's one boss fight in particular. You know which one.
Me, 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 me. I am the great mighty Pooh, and I'm going to throw my shit at you.
If you ever heard people talk about this game, chances are this is the moment that they remembered. It's weird, it's ridiculous, and it's hilarious. And somehow it became one of the most iconic boss fights of the era. The game is filled with moments like that. And while the humor definitely isn't for everyone, it's also a big part of why the game became so memorable. It was the video game equivalent of a parody movie. Technically speaking, Conker's Bad Fur Day is one of the most impressive games on the N64. Rare really pushed the hardware this time, even without the expansion pack. Character animations were surprisingly detailed, environments were large, and there's a lot of personality in the presentation. Conker himself is extremely expressive. Even small things like his reactions and idle animations add to the humor. He actually reminds me of myself sometimes. Considering this game came out near the end of the N64's lifespan, it's pretty clear that Rare had mastered the system at this point. And honestly, it still holds up pretty well today. In 2005, Rare released a remake called Conker Live and Reloaded for the original Xbox. The single-player campaign was mostly the same game, but visually it was completely rebuilt with updated graphics and improved lighting. Some of the humor was toned down a little bit compared to the N64 version though, surprisingly, but overall it stayed pretty faithful to the original. The biggest change actually came from the multiplayer. Instead of the goofy modes from the N64 version, the remake introduced a much more structured team-based multiplayer mode. It felt very different from the original, but it was still interesting to see the game evolve. Having played both versions, the original Conker's Bad Fur Day still has that N64 charm, but Live and Reloaded definitely showed how good this game could look with more powerful hardware.
La la ba la, la 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 ba la. Ooh da dee da ra ro da da dee. La ba 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 la dum be la ya.
The soundtrack also plays a big role in this game's personality. Some tracks feel like classic platformer music, others lean heavily into the cinematic parody. And of course, there's that musical number during the Great Mighty Pooh boss fight. It's ridiculous, I know. But somehow it also works perfectly for the game. Voice acting is another big part of Conker's identity. This wasn't something you saw very often on the N64, but here it adds a lot to the overall experience. There's a lot of it, and it's really well done. For the most part, this game runs surprisingly well. There are a few moments where the frame rate dips a bit, especially in larger areas, and like many N64 games, the camera will give you fits at times, but overall, the game performs pretty well considering how much Rare packed into it. And compared to some of the other games from that era, it's all good. The main story usually takes around 8 to 10 hours to finish, but the game also includes a multiplayer mode that adds quite a bit of extra content. Of course, this is if you could get someone to play this with you over the better multiplayer games available for the console. These modes feature different scenarios and character types, including some of the parody war movies. It almost feels like a completely separate game. And between the single-player campaign and multiplayer options, there's actually a decent amount of content we have here for an N64 title. So when it's all said and done, how does Conker's Bad Fur Day hold up today? Honestly, it's still one of the most unique games on the N64. It's weird, it's crude, and at times it's completely ridiculous, but underneath all that is a platformer that holds up surprisingly well. And now that this game has reached its 25th anniversary, it's easy to see why people still talk about it. There really wasn't anything else like it at the time, and surprisingly, like I mentioned earlier, even today. Hopefully this little guy makes a comeback someday. Microsoft, please do something with him. And now I'm curious, did you play Conker back in the day, or are you discovering it for the first time now? Let me know, because for me, Revisiting this game all these years later, it's clear that Conker's Bad Fur Day still stands out as one of the most memorable games of all time. But I have to say, for a Bad Fur Day, that was actually a pretty good tale. And that's a wrap. It's time to reboot. I'll see you on the other side.
Ah, you cursed squirrel, look what you've done! I'm blushing! Oh, what a world, what a world! Who would have thought a good little squirrel like you could destroy my beautiful flagginess? Oh, I'm going! No!
Now that's what I call a bowel movement.